Hello, you're listening to Don't Listen to This podcast, all about 1,001 albums to listen to before you die, or allegedly should. If Robert Dimery's word is gospel, then we are here to, desecrate it and rip it apart. Like all good books should be just absolutely eviscerated, destroyed. Don't pay any notice of it. But don't pay any notice of me either, because I am qualified to talk about it, but I didn't write a book. So he's got me on that front, has Robert Dimery with his 1,001 albums, but I am Ewan Gleadow. I'm a journalist of a couple of years now. I feel old, but you can tell I'm getting old because I put my fringe down because my hairline's receding. But that's okay. We don't worry about that. I am, as ever, joined by a fantastic guest. Thank you very, very much for joining me, Nicolò Grasso. Hello, how are you?
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm good. I'm excited. I always love coming on this podcast. I always say I'm not that big of a music guy in terms of just talking about it, but whenever I'm here, I just keep on rambling for
Yeah,
hours on end. So
it's great. I mean, I'm glad to hear you're excited to be on the podcast. That makes one of us. Um, what have you been?
oh,
What have you been listening to recently?
I've been listening a lot of to a lot of the band that we're talking about today, but also
Hmm.
I've discovered an artist that's very popular. I'd never listened to any of her songs beforehand, though. Janelle Monáe.
Oh,
I
okay, yeah.
went years, almost decades now, considering how long she's been active, without having heard a single one of her songs. Um, but then I started doing this challenge on Letterboxd because every year I try to take a different challenge to kind of watch different movies that I wouldn't normally watch. And for 2023, I'm doing a queer film challenge, and one of the prompts was a film starring Janelle Monáe, and I was like, oh, there's this Dirty Computer thing that came out. I remember it coming out in 2018. Hadn't seen it, and when I watched it, I was like, fuck yeah, I love this music. It's amazing. I fell in love with it, so I've been listening to a lot of her for the past few days.
I think, I mean, that's a fantastic way to get into music, though, isn't it? With film. I mean, we've just finished
Visual
train
albums,
spotting as well, and
especially.
visual albums as well.
It's interesting.
And one of the members of the group we're going to talk about today, we've just spoken about the film where the song was used quite predominantly with train spotting and
Yeah.
Lou Reed's Perfect Day, because of course I announce it as if it's a surprise or a shock to anybody listening, but you have read the title, you have thought, oh, Velvet Underground, that's piqued my interest, and you've clicked it. This is not a shock to you that we're talking about the Velvet Underground self-titled third album, The Velvet Underground, released in, if I'm not mistaken, 1969. Which, of course, I'm not mistaken. I wrote it down 3 days ago. But the illusion of spontaneity is always a nice thing to have on these sorts of things because it does a lot of heavy lifting when we've got to get the episode to just under an hour. Um, but we'll crack on through. Um, Velvet Underground, man, there's a lot to be said about them, and most of my words about. If you would ask me what I thought of the Velvet Underground 2 years ago, most of my words would be, "Yeah, they're okay. That's the one with the banana." Thankfully, I have grown a brain since then. I've rubbed my two brain cells together and out popped a third brain cell. And now I've got three brain cells, three albums from the Velvet Underground so far. But the best one is the fourth one they did. I'm sure we'll get into that much later though, because Loaded's
Oh
a
yes.
masterpiece. Anyway, Velvet Underground, man, 1969. Velvet Underground, obviously Lou Reed, Sterling Morrison, Doug Yule, and Maureen Tucker are the big four on this third album. Obviously, there's a big name missing there, John Cale, who was booted out of the band essentially and went off and did some absolutely remarkable solo albums, which is stunning. I mean, at the time of recording, no, I don't mean to brag, but I've got his new album in my inbox, and it's Tuesday. It's not Friday. It's not out yet. You prick. But this album, of course, is pop rock, folk rock, art rock, and folk pop, which is just an amalgamation of the words pop, rock, and folk, with some artistic sensibilities because Andy Warhol and the Factory are tied to this one just as much as the second one.
Yes.
Um, I'll I'll tell you what. I'll power on through the insert, and then we can talk about music and sound and all that good stuff.
I'm interested to
Um,
hear what our good boy has to say for this
are
album.
you
I hope
really?
it makes me happy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, sometimes
Oh,
it can be a bit of a disappointment, but I'm feeling it's gonna be a good one. Very
how much would you?
insightful.
How much would you bet on that? I'm a gambling man. I'm trying to save up to move out and put a deposit down. How much do you want to bet? Let's bet 10 grand. Yeah,
I'm gonna
10
bet
grand.
a full meal at Domino's. With
Oh,
the cookie at the end as well.
do you have Domino's in Italy still? Because I'd read somewhere that
No,
they
it's been
also.
closed.
Is it gone?
I think so.
I wish
I
they'd
think
do that
fully
in
as
the
well.
UK. Bring back Pizza Hut. Oh, what a revolution. I'm not saying I wouldn't let this podcast be sponsored by Domino's. I'm a big Domino's fan if that is the case. I'm just saying Pizza Hut's a bit better the last time I had it, which was when I was 12. Um,
Pizza Hut should step up, you know.
what was it? Did Pizza Hut have Pizza had a mascot, didn't it? You can't out Pizza the Hut was their thing, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah, that was the UK slogan was you can't out Pizza the Hut. Um,
Oh, ooh,
you most certainly can, but
it's a
that's for
hut.
another podcast entirely. Uh, which I don't think there is a podcast to deliver those needs. It's certainly not
1001
here.
pizzas to eat before you die.
Oh man, you know what the best one I had was that slice we had in Venice next to the sandwich shop. Been
Yes.
chasing that high ever since. I was looked on with such disdain for not knowing Italian, but they still served me a good slice.
Damn.
Fantastic.
I want pizza and a banana.
Oh man, I wish. I mean, we'll get to the banana stuff later on. Obviously, that's on the list, but I do want to talk about it because I want to tell you about the time I almost bought a print of one of Andy Warhol's works, and then I saw the price of it. But we'll
Oof.
crash through the insert first, and then we'll forget about that little anecdote. In contrast to their groundbreaking debut album and the self-destructive rush of sophomore release White Light, White Heat, the Velvet Underground's self-titled third record was created in a comparatively relaxed atmosphere. There were fewer extremes in the lyrics of the band's sound, in part due to John Cale having left the band, but also because their usual equipment had been stolen at the airport on their way to the LA studios where it was recorded. From the sublime introduction, Candy Says about transvestite Candy Darling, sung by Cale's replacement Doug Yule, to its unforgettable final scene, After Hours, featuring the childlike voice of drummer Maureen Tucker, the Velvet Underground saw Lou Reed graduate from druggy street poet to articulate songwriter, excelling himself in songs like the exquisite confessional Pale Blue Eyes, the redemptive I'm Set Free, and the literary experiment The Murder Mystery. Rockers' What Goes On and Beginning to See the Light showed the fire was still burning inside, but the album's understated peak is the slow, sexy Some Kind of Love, with Reed and guitarist Sterling Morrison trading infectious licks. The Velvets were no longer such a weird creature, as their conservative appearance on the cover indicates. The shot was taken by Billy Linick, aka Billy Name, at Andy Warhol's factory. They had been boosted up to the MGM label, but the record company promoted the album poorly, and it was lost to the general public. And one of the concessions, I remember there was a quote, and I can't remember who it's from. I might have written it down. Yeah, I don't know who said it, but it was essentially the Velvet Underground, one of their albums, sold 10,000 copies. Those 10,000 copies, the people that bought them went on to start their own bands. It's that influence.
Amazing.
It's huge. However, out of those 10,000, how many of them were actually quality? um, who knows? We can't judge that. But Nick, what are your memories with this album? Because if I'm not mistaken, you picked this album out of the other Velvet Underground albums on the list.
Yeah, it's for me. It's a mixture of the songs and just the quality of the album as a whole. I do really, really love Velvet Underground. It's one of those things you mentioned earlier, the Perfect Day song used in Train Spotting. That's a song that's been used in many, many movies. And that's how I first discovered Lou Reed. I want to say it was like 2010, maybe, when I first discovered it. I was like, man, like just that song hit me in a way I couldn't really express, just musically speaking, because I could barely understand any of the lyrics as a 13-year-old Italian boy. But it really stuck with me for many years, and since then I've delved into the Velvet Underground, and also through the Nico connection, and all the collaborations they had. But it's something about that entire period of music, and that space, because when I was last on when I last was on this podcast, we talked about Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan, New York City, the Village, kind of a different vibe from what the Velvet Underground were doing at the time and in the late 60s, because they were with good Andy Warhol, and that entire art scene just fascinates me to death. And so the Velvet Underground as an album, I think, like the good writer of the book mentioned, it's different from what they were doing back then. It's a little bit less experimental for the most part, but it has just wonderful sounds. And I think the lyrics in almost all of the songs are just so poignant, so powerful. There's something special about the opening one, Candy Says, that has grown to become one of my all-time favorites very recently. um he just it just feels good. It's this very laid back collection of songs where you can just kind of, you sit in your chair and just close your eyes and they just start playing. And it's very comforting. It's like a warm embrace after an ugly cry. That's the type
Oh
of
yeah,
vibe that it gives you. Especially Pale Blue Eyes, of course, one of probably the most famous song of the entire album, rightfully so, I'd say even. But yeah, this is kind of my messy history with with
it's
these
always
tracks.
it's always good to have a messy history with some albums, though. I mean, I think if you don't have one of those albums, it's perplexing. There are always those albums. I mean, for me, it's different class because just how long I've listened to it and how often. But it's a stark contrast, this sort of warm embrace of the Velvet Underground, to what they've just done with the Nico album, the collaboration, which is stemmed in a lot more harsher sustainabilities, a lot of difficult themes, a lot of arguably harsher tones, despite the sort of lighter cover.
Mhm.
And comparatively, the self-titled third album is, like you said, it's a really warm album. It I put it on again last night, and it did feel endless in that good way of this has been on for ages. It felt, I mean, these tracks are like 4 to 8 minutes long. It feels like a lifetime. It really is just something that is a quality that I'd missed the first time round because I
Mm.
listened to this. Um, oh man, I want to say like early 2020, and I didn't really have any love for the Velvet Underground at the time, and I didn't until the end of last year when I saw Loaded on vinyl, and I thought, I'll have a punt on that one, and that turned out to be my favorite Velvet Underground album. And the sort of change of pace, the flow of the group, the history of the group escaped me between the transition of the second and the third album and then on to the fourth one. It still does because I may have researched, but I didn't do that much research. Um, more than anything, I found myself diving into the people that influenced them or were in that scene. People like Andy Warhol, whose Popism book is really a fascinating read for getting into that sort of culture at the time. The sort of ins and outs of it, the people that would crop up, like you mentioned, Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan kind of just pops up because he was in the same area. It's New York. New York is a huge place, but people kept bumping into each other. But
Especially artists.
yeah, especially artists, people like Leonard Cohen in their early days mentioned, people that have a real profound effect on not just me, but on music and the push forward of it and audiences elsewhere. And the Velvet Underground, they escaped me with that, and I don't know why. And it was a re-listen to this where it is beautiful. It really is stunning. Um, my mate doesn't like Velvet Underground, and I'm sure he won't
Oh.
mind me mentioning that he can't stand them because he just thinks it's really noisy and loud and annoying. But that says a lot about the lack of attention to the lyrics, and the lyrics, especially on the first track and the second track, are beautiful. They are incredible. And you mentioned it as well, Candy Says and Pale Blue Eyes, stunning tracks, amazing. And what is it about them for you that really strikes you? I don't know why I did jazz hands then. Yeah, I'm
Just
so glad there's a split screen, so there's a chance that me doing that's going to be gone, as if I was like a stage performer from the '50s. Fuck me, Jesus! Please, if you ever see me raise my hands again, just go, no, don't do that.
just just slapping them from afar. Down.
That's why I need to do podcasts in person, so the other guests can just whack me over the head with a microphone
Just whip it like Indiana Jones.
or
Um,
Devo.
oh, um, for me, there's the song Candy Says. It's one that I heard multiple times. It's fairly famous, I'd say. But the moment where it really hit me is when I understood what it was about. um, and the figure of Candy Darling, she was absolutely a trailblazing trans woman for the time. She appeared in many, many movies, very strong performances. Sadly, she never had the opportunity to fully shine because unfortunately she passed away. I want to say in 1974, maybe 1975. So she was barely 40 years old, but what she did, um, you know, Lou Reed especially was. he was a fan of Outcasts. He was an Outcast himself, and even speaking of just trans women, I know that he actually was in a relationship with a muse uh, for like 3 or 4 years in the 70s too. So he was always very close to the LGBT plus community. And there's just something about the lyrics of Candy Says that are just so nostalgic, so just sad. It's it's this woman who just doesn't feel like she fits in the right body. It's like, what is this body that I'm in? What are people talking about? Like, I want to belong to this world. I want to be normal in a way. uh, but instead of being a downbeat dour song, there is actually this element of optimism to it all, and the possibility of a brighter future, of change, of improving, of finding love, and just uh yeah, it's a story about change and transformation, which is very beautiful. I'd even say there's I shared this with you. There's a cover by the singer Anoni, or Anthony, who's also a trans singer, and she kind of repurposed the song for herself in a very powerful way. And coincidentally, I found it very stunning. I was playing this video game called Immortality, which I don't really want to spoil too much of, because it's a very unique experience. If you like FMVs, and editing, and just obsessing over watching the same footage multiple times, it's a great video game. But there is an hidden scene in that where one of the characters sings Candy Says, but it's actually the cover by Anoni, and the way that it plays, I was just like, fuck me, this is amazing. The way it ties into the singer of the cover, and the way it ties also back to the fact that it is a cover of a Velvet Underground song. It's just beautiful. I must have listened to this song. Like, I don't do Spotify. I have all these albums actually downloaded and ready to listen to my leisure. But if I had Spotify, this would definitely be in both my Spotify Wrapped of 2022 and 2023, because I just love it. Same for Pale Blue Eyes. I'll say even a couple of other songs as well. I really dig After Hours. I think the writer mentioned it as well. Just the change of voice helps a lot. It's this nice little finale to the album where it's like, oh, this is different. This is nice. It feels very young in a way compared to Lou Reed's voice.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, it's fun because I've been on this show now 3 times, and I think talked about Abbey Road, talked about John Baez, but this is probably the album that feels most consistent. I'm just like, I like every song in here. There's not that one track where I'm like, I kind of want to skip it. When I'm listening to it, I kind of want to skip it. It's like, no, 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 no. The way they're put together, the way they move from one to the other, just heads off. Like, knowing the fact that they actually lost the instruments as well kind of makes it feel more intimate. I love those things. When we were talking about John Baez, it's like, I love just the guitar playing in the background. It's like, yeah, yeah, it works. If it were heavier in terms of instruments, in terms of just sounds, it could be noisy like your mate would. Feels
Yeah.
like, I think this may be an album that you would enjoy. It's not too loud, not too
Well, that's the
annoying.
thing. It's the best thing that ever happened to Velvet Underground is someone stole their instruments. No, it's like you said.
Blessing in disguise.
It's a beautiful album, but it's also quite a pioneering one in the sense of it's a first time experience for a lot of the people on this album that were
Hmm.
actually behind it. I mean, what you call him, the drummer Yule, was his first time singing in the studio for doing Candy Says, and it was at Lou Reed's insistence because Lou Reed was that tired from touring. He was like, "I don't want to do the song, you do it. For the love of God, just do it before my head explodes from the hangover." And it's amazing the inflection that has on the song. It's amazing how much faith can be put in. There's a lot of groups where, I mean, Long Pig springs to mind, where the guitarist Richard Hawley was sort of just dabbling in solo stuff at the time, and it was just by chance that people he was recording with, Mark Webber and Jarvis Cocker, I think it might have been Steve Mackey, not Mark Webber,
Hmm.
but they said to him, it's like, oh, well, why don't you record that? We've got the studio free, go and record it. And then he had a whole career as a solo artist, and it happened to John Cale, it happened to Lou Reed. It's amazing what people can find in a studio recording just out of pure happenstance of oh, the singer doesn't really feel up to it today. Can you step in? A whole new world of music is then created, and it's really stunning. And a lot of Velvet Underground for me, the album, not the band, it's going to be very difficult to make that distinction for the rest of the episode, isn't it? A
It's
lot of
John
it for
Baez all
me.
over again.
Oh, why is it that you come on for the self-titled albums? No, it's the insistence of doing something different, not out of passion for creativity, but out of hangover and fatigue. There's a real sense that Velvet Underground have left literally everything that they've got energy wise on this album, and it does show because it's very
Hmm.
innovative in all the places that wouldn't really feel the need to innovate. It's it's that sort of creativity that strikes through best, and it's like you said, I'd be happy to listen to this the whole way through. Even there are one or two songs that don't work for me. There's one
Hmm.
in particular I'm just not into it, but even then, by the time you get to the murder mystery, you're at a point where 8 minutes of really good technical layering sounds really good, even if it does sound like what I hear when I wake up on a morning. It's just nice. It was not nice. It sounds horrific, but at that point, the album has earned it to go that place, and that's so promising about Velvet Underground. It's so important to what they do with their album here. If you open with that, it's a very different story. Um,
Mm.
and it's not be too negative about the album, but I'm not too convinced by Tucker singing on the last track. I'm not really kind of into it. But again, it's at that point you're closing it off. These songs feel endless. It earns it. It earns that experimentation because again, the Yule experimentation where he sang the first track. That's how you get new music, and it's great. It's a real
Mm.
shining example of how experiment through accident comes about a great song. But for me, I do really like what goes on. That just did something to me. It's a stunning song. I think I'm just a sucker for stuff like organs and string sections, though. So
Yes.
take my comments with a hint of salt. No, I do love. I think it is a phenomenal track, and it's I listen to a lot of albums all the time, and it's very few make it into the playlist on my phone. That one went straight in. That was wonderful to hear. That was amazing. I've not added anything to that playlist. The last song I added was a Richard Hawley song that I'd heard about. I want to say 6 months before I'd added anything else.
Hmm.
So it's a long gap. It takes a lot of prestige to get onto my playlists. But no, that one was phenomenal. And I'm just gonna take a look at my notes. I think I know where the album starts to lose me, but at that point, I've got enough sort of interest in seeing where it goes. And I think it's around the time that it gets to Jesus where I'm like, I can take it or leave it. It's not going to hit the highs of Pale Blue Eyes, but it's not going to be terrible. It's not going to be
Hmm.
bad. And I think when I first listened to this album, that was what I didn't give it enough credit for, is that it does the fundamentals really well. It experiments in accidents and a lot of it comes down to sort of appreciating the technical aspects of it, appreciating the merit of mixing. I mean, this is
Mm.
Lou Reed's creation. He mixed most of it. He released it, and the
That's
album did
impressive.
expectedly nothing because people weren't listening to Velvet Underground at the time. They're a legacy. It's a legacy that started long after they'd gone. It's like Donny Emerson with Dreaming Wild, which I'm pretty sure I saw twice at Venice in the same day, which was wonderful because the second time I watched it, I kept inching ever closer, like along the seats to go and sit near what you call him, Casey
Casey
Affleck. Yeah.
Affleck. Big fan, big fan.
Oh yeah, but yeah, I mean, Velvet Underground for me is a really strange beast. I mean, do you like their other albums?
I like them in general. There is maybe it's my love for experimental, just avant-garde in general
Yeah,
art, and the whole scene just works for me. Maybe even the fact that I've seen them pop up here and there. Like I've watched a documentary by Todd Haynes, I believe, from 1 or 2 years ago, which is again very bold in its own way, the way
yeah,
it's put together about the band and Nico. But there's even this one. I remember there's this medium length, let's say, documentary made by Andy Warhol, shot at the factory, where it was the Velvet Underground just playing, fuffing around for 20-30 minutes straight, and then just the police arrive. Someone called the police in the building, and they just have to stop. It's insane. It's again a very experimental project, but I really gravitate towards these types of artists. And there is something, I think you briefly mentioned it earlier as well, about this album specifically, where it's different styles to the point that it almost feels like you're listening to different bands at times. Not so much with this one, but a couple of the older albums, even the ones with Nico, the collaborations, there are so many tonal shifts and changes in tempo and mood from one song to the other, where it's like almost an intentional whiplash effect uh, that I crave. I kind of like those things, and even here, like when you said that you really love what goes on, I was like, that's almost like a Beatles song. Like I can totally see the Beatles around the same time, kind of pulling something off like that. It sounds the same. The tempo is a bit more upbeat than other songs in the album. So I yeah, I think I should just fully delve into their albums in a very almost like a collectionist type of way, just kind of savoring them over and over because there's just something about their music that keeps me going. I think there's this very hypnotic rhythm. Like you said, it feels endless listening to this album and their style in general. It's almost like it evokes this imagery of just a dark room full of smoke in the air and people just, high on, I don't know, marijuana probably. One of those very relaxing drugs and just vibing, and that's what they are. They're a vibe. I don't want to be like a Twitter, uh, just someone unable to use stronger words or adjectives. But Velvet Underground is a vibe.
At least you didn't finish that sentence with "it's a vibe, bro."
It's a
You know,
vibe, bro.
I'm not doing it. I'm not saying that. No, you are correct. It is a very big vibe. No, you're right.
Big
It's a
mood.
lot of tonal shifts, and it speaks well for the sort of representation of that creativity. Like the last track, After Hours, feels like a Great Depression era song. It feels like of that
Yeah.
period, which I thought of myself and did not read off of Wikipedia there. No, it is a very prevalent sort of artistic choice to make so many different songs sound so different, and it reminds me of the White Album by the Beatles, where all four of them went in with inherently different ideas of what the album should sound like. So you've got something like
Mm.
Helter Skelter, then you've got something like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and then you've got Revolution 9. And it's just such a cluster. And it feels like individuals working by themselves that are putting them together, but it just fundamentally works.
Mm.
Velvet Underground feels like that quite a lot of the time. Obviously, predominantly it's Lou Reed on the vocals. Sometimes he's joined by Yule. Sometimes I think Morrison as well. And then obviously Tucker closes the album out. So everybody gets a shot at showcasing that talent. And I think that, you know, speaks rather well for the album and the people involved that they were able to find some space for everybody. Because what that does is it gives four very unique creative minds the chance to shine. And it does, it really does work. Um, a lot of the tracks, again, for me, just kind of flow so easily. And it's a feeling that I don't have with White Light, White Heat. That's never something I experienced with that album.
Mm.
And I read a few reviews of it, and people are saying, "Oh, it's not as harsh as White Light, White Heat. It's not as in your face. It's not as rudimentary." And it's like, well, yeah, but this is the third album. They've had time to process this. They've had time to really think about what they're putting down. And again, it's a shame that it never really sold that well. But it's the legacy thing, isn't it? It's, 20 years on, Lou Reed was still performing Velvet Underground tracks because the people it influenced. It was, I hate the term ahead of its time because something can't be ahead of its time if it's released before a period. It's you've stumbled onto something and then somebody else has found it later on. Velvet Underground do have that feel to them now. I think a lot of that
Yeah.
says a lot about their sort of presence in pop culture. They're still relevant, they're still around, there's still people that recognize the banana print, which I almost bought. But um, a lot of it comes from, I mean, at the core of it is the talent that is involved with making this music. That's why it's relevant. And a lot of it also is how deeply personal it is. I mean, we spoke about Lou Reed's Perfect Day on Death by Adaptation with
Mm.
Trainspotting, and how fundamentally that is a song that can be lifted and taken, and it's such a broad song yet so personal that it's that perfect balance that every artist must be gunning for, apart from Noel Gallagher, who's shit. Sorry, I just had to get another Noel Gallagher knock in there because His album comes out soon. I don't like his music. Did it on the Trainspot podcast. Did it here. Same night. Got to do the same jokes twice. I'll have new material next time.
His fans
But
can attack you twice this way.
oh god, I'm sick of fans attacking me for. I tell you what, right? I know this is a little diversion, but we're at the 30-minute mark, and I've got a bit more time to pad. I'm going to read out a comment I got. I didn't publish it.
Go for it.
This is on a review of the new Circa Waves album called Never Going Under. Do you know about Circa Waves?
I do not.
Okay. Do you know Franz Ferdinand, the band? That did
I
Take
don't
Me
know.
Out?
Maybe Take Me Out sounds, yeah.
Yeah, it's essentially grab any sort of fundamental mid-2000s British artist that had one hit and just nothing else, but somehow plodded on for another 10 years, and that's Circa Waves.
Okay.
I really didn't like their album because I think a lot of it for me, and it's why I'm starting to appreciate the Velvet Underground more, is that Velvet Underground are very unique. There is not an artist out there that is quite like Velvet Underground. The only ones that I can think of are the artists that were formerly Velvet Underground.
Singularly.
So to listen to an album that could be made by anybody, which is Circa Waves' music, like it or not, they have a fundamental broadness to them that is the reason for their appeal. The reason for Circa Waves' appeal is that they're light, they're pop, they're indie. It's the broad indie generalization. With that broad generalization comes the broadness of message and lyric. Circa Waves have nothing interesting going on. It's empty hearts, empty heads for them. They wrote a political song, and the closest it gets to sort of any sort of social commentary, which is what this man thinks I'm commenting on, closest they get is just the lyric, politicians are liars. It's like,
that's right. Deep.
That's really deep. It's cutting edge stuff.
Yeah.
It's not exactly... It's not exactly a ballad to one of your close friends that was a factory member with Andy Warhol and lamenting their career and their struggles and their wars and their addiction. Politics are bad. That fundamentally, like, joking aside, that is such a shit lyric because it doesn't develop anything. It doesn't develop any thought. It is just a comment. It's not a comment that fulfills anything. It's just pointing at something and going, that's happening over there. It's like you see a bird and go, look, fucking magpie. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. There's a lack of depth to it that Velvet Underground have. They've got it in bucket loads, and it just the more I listen to music that I don't quite like, the more I appreciate Velvet Underground because it's unique, it's varied, and it's vibrant, and it's a real spectacle that feels like it's achieving something, unlike Circa Waves' new album. However, my review did not please the Circa Waves fans, all one of them.
This is just a full-time job, just defending them online, probably.
Yeah, I mean,
if I'm not going to do it, who will?
I kind of wake up every other day to a comment on an album or a single that I didn't like. It's always music. It's never film. Always music. Because it's easier to have an opinion on something that lasts about 4 minutes than it is 2 hours. But a man called Peter, I will not reveal any more than that, just a man called Peter.
Are they associated with the dissociation
No, they're not associated with the band as far as I'm aware. But the good thing about WordPress is that when people comment, you also get their email address. But I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to sign them up to like spam emails yet. Peter commented, "What an utterly negative, vitriolic review of a decent album. Circa Waves never claimed to be a political band, but if the reviewer had listened to the lyrics, they'd have found some social commentary on there as well as catchy tunes to go with them. Obviously, being objective is not the aim here, and there was never going to be a positive review for an album that has been widely well received. Hopefully no one paid the reviewer for his biased, depressing opinion." What would you say the sort of textbook definition of a review is? It's opinion, isn't it? Right?
Well, in a way, I can kind of see what they mean, but also not really.
I understand the fundamental of a review needs to be objective, but it also needs to be personal.
It's a balance of both.
Yes, it's not for me to make the argument whether or not my review is objective. I know it's personal because I wrote it. Whether or not it's objective is up to somebody else. Their objective point is that something that has catchy tunes and mentions politics is a good album.
They say decent. That's also the thing I love.
Decent.
It's a decent album. It's not too shabby.
But it's not, because if you listen to more in that genre, the more you listen to music, the better grasp you've got, the better grasp of not what is good, but what you like. You
Hmm.
know, me liking an album does not mean it's good. You liking an album does not mean it's good. But there are fundamentals that kind of just have to be accepted. The Velvet Underground is technically creative. I hate the word visionaries, but there's not much else. The amount of
Yeah.
inspiration that they have tethered to music, that is undeniable. That is a fact. On the other hand, Circa Waves being a really dull replica of what is essentially a very popular genre, or at least it was 10 years ago, and continuing with that, that's not commentary, that's just fact. That
Hmm.
is what they are because there is still appeal for that. Whether or not they do anything interesting with it is the objective part. You know, Velvet Underground would be a very different beast if they didn't do anything objective or interesting with it. You know, you can't just do the same thing that has been repeated elsewhere. Fatigue is a real thing with creativity, where it's, you know, we're seeing it now with the Marvel movies, but we saw it with westerns, we saw it with folk music. Every genre has fatigue to it, and artists like
Yeah.
Circa Web help it. On the flip side of that, artists like Velvet Underground are the fundamental reason for the survival of genre, for the survival of certain artists. It's that quality that keeps things intact and relevant. Circle waves do more damage than they do good.
Yeah. What I
But
also really like about the Velvet Underground, after what you're saying, is that they make music for themselves. And I think in art in general, that's what you have to do. The moment you start making music for other people, which I know for some is kind of hard to grasp as a concept, because I've had this conversation with non-film family members and non-film friends, or like, but why, like, people are gonna watch it, why wouldn't you make it for someone to watch it? And
yeah,
it's not as easy as that. When you listen to the Velvet Underground, you can feel that this is coming from a personal place for Lou Reed, who primarily writes the lyrics, but also like the band members, the way they riff on each other when they do some of the more experimental tracks, or or just the strength and the emotions put into some of the simpler tunes, some of the quieter tunes, even in the voice. I know you're not a big fan of Jesus, but I just like something about the end of the chorus. There's like
yeah.
Jesus. There's like, man, like they don't care. And even when you watch the documentaries of them, they just don't care. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. They're making what they want to do. And if you like it, great. If you don't like it, that's fine. You don't have to listen to it. You know, and that's what I really hate when you hear about comments like that one. It's like, ah, it's fine. Like if you
Yeah.
like it, it's fine. It's fine. You don't have to force your opinion on someone else. Just like you are not forcing your opinion on them. Just don't read the review. If you don't like
Yeah.
Ewan's review, just don't read it. You don't have to comment
No, no, no,
or
don't say
bother
that.
him.
Half the views I get are
I
from
mean,
people that don't
read
like
them,
me.
but then read them, but don't bother him with comments.
No,
Um,
no, like I really like that people tell me that they disagree with my opinion because there's nothing to disagree with. I got interviewed by a French Canadian podcast of all things, and they asked,
oh,
"Who do you write for?" And I said myself, and they were like, well, "What do you mean?" They're like, I write for myself. I do it because it entertains me. Whether or not it entertains other people is secondary. Because if I'm
hmm.
writing for someone else, it means I'm changing the style of the language I'm using. It means I'm changing my fundamentals of what makes me and my writing so unique, or what I would perceive as unique. And it's the
There's some
exact same thing for
censorship.
Velvet Undergrounds.
Hmm.
It's they are making a very personal album. You can tell that this is an album that is inherently linked to in jokes, to colloquial images of the time, to the factory, to Andy Warhol, to Candy, to things that happened to them and only them. And to extrapolate that and to make it broad is not a constant. It is not a choice to do that. It's just that people have found meaning for themselves in it. It's not the job of a creative or an artist or a writer or a filmmaker to provide that for you. You have got to look at that for yourself. And it's fundamental. I'm not comparing myself to Velvet Underground because one of them is a better writer and the other one released 5 albums. But I should point out I've not released 5 albums.
Not yet.
No, I could do
Give it
albums.
time. Give
I
it
think
time.
I'd love to. I mean, it's it's. I can't remember who said it. But it was something like those who can't do music journalism. It's like, yeah, pretty much. I've got a guitar back there that I've not touched in years. But the overall point I'm trying to make is that Velvet Underground's third self-titled album is such a fundamentally personal album that it's no wonder that it didn't sell well because it's made for the 4 people at the heart of it,
Hmm.
and that's what makes it so endearing. Though that's what keeps its legacy going, and it's why it really is just something essential to listen to. It's so much better on a re-listen, and it's going to get better from there. I'm sure. Is that those personal inflections? I could not name you a good album that does not have some level of personal meaning to it, whether that's lyrics, whether that's production, whether or not that's the backstory to how the album was made. It's a fundamental of good music. To put it back to Circa Waves, there's nothing on that album that feels personal, that feels unique, because it's just what is popular. When you write for someone else, when you write for an audience, you are essentially writing for the popular denomination. You are writing for
Hmm.
something that is going to sell. And that takes the heart out of it immediately. I don't care who it is, I don't care how it's done, it takes the heart out of it. It's like the last album that really released under Velvet Underground, Squeeze in '73. The
I think I've
Velvet.
listened to that one.
Yeah, I mean, Lou Reed wasn't part of it at that point. I mean, there's a stark
Mm.
contrast between the ratings of the former four albums and then that one. And it's because people can sense when something isn't personal. People can sense, at the very least, I think, if you're not a fan of this or a fan of that, it's like there are certain artists that I'm not into, but I can at least appreciate that they're being personal. That their
Yes.
fundamentals at the core of it are genuine. They are made for themselves, or at the very least, are connecting with someone. That's far, far better than something that just repeats something without that context, without that intimacy. And it's like you said, this album is a really nice, warm hug. It is because it's so personal, and to find meaning in something that somebody else has written, to find personality in that, is the best feeling there is with music, with film, with books. And Velvet Underground, I think, is the best example of that for the Velvet Underground.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a shame that, at least from personal experience, Velvet Underground, everyone kind of knows the name. I barely know anyone who can, like, off the top of their head, like, name one of the songs. But then when they
Yeah,
actually listen to them, it's like, oh yeah, okay, Take a Walk on the Wild Side, okay, okay, oh, Pale Blue Eye, okay, okay, like all of those classics, all those bangers, all the Nico songs, especially. I think these days, it's like, oh, yeah, you know, it's it's. I don't even know how to say it. It's interesting how the singular songs are famous, the band itself is famous, but they've not reached the level of, connection that mainstream listeners have to, like, other songs like Rolling Stones or Deep Purple or the Beatles, all those ones.
yeah.
It's interesting, but I think it's, it's the Velvet Underground. They're still a bit niche in their own fame, I could say.
They are,
Bless
and
them,
it's.
bless
I
them.
mean, that kind of brings us to the sort of the best track, the legacy of it. It's a deeply, deeply personal album. It didn't shift um, more than 10,000 copies when it was first out. By
Such a small number.
1991, it had sold 200,000 copies, which, it's more than most albums sell if we think about sort of everything that releases. But at the same time, for an established band that people look back on as one of the best, it's not that many, especially over 20 years after it was first released. I mean, I
Especially.
can't say anything because I've not bought it either, but because I bought
Oh,
Loaded because I much prefer Loaded. But what is the best track on this? What is the sort of, you've got to pick one. I hate picking one, and I hate doing this where we have to pick a best track. But
it's
it's a
fun.
nice
It's fun though. It's a
it's a nice
Sophie's
signifier
choice.
that we're near the end.
Yeah, it's definitely a toss up for me between
Hmm.
Pale Blue Eyes and Candy Says,
Yeah,
because especially Candy Says, I don't know. There's just something about it. I'd probably go for that because I simply haven't listened to a song in a long time that often,
yeah,
to a song that much to a song in just a short amount of time. I'll go for that one. It's also
yeah.
just a great introduction, like you were saying. It's a
It
different
is. It is.
voice. It's very soft spoken. It's very delicate. It has the entire history behind it. If you know it, it heightens the experience so much more, makes it so much more poignant. If you don't know it though, it's still, who's this Candy, and you can kind of get behind it. I think you can intuitively get it,
Yeah.
what it's really about. But again, it's so personal. It comes from the heart. It ends up being something that so many people can relate to. That's
Oh
the
yeah.
beauty of this album, I think.
I think that those two are really solid tracks, and I was thinking of which one to pick, and I've got to go with What Goes On.
Mm,
Because that's the track that something clicked in my head. It's like actually Velvet Underground are better than Bang Average as I've sort of
yeah.
perceived them as, which is mad because I think it's just sort of stated that everybody that is involved in sort of music has to like Velvet Underground. So I always felt like a bit of an outsider that just didn't get it. And listening to what goes on really just turned a corner for me. It was like, oh yeah, okay, that's what they're about. I get it now. It was impressive on an instrumental level, which I'd never really associated with Velvet Underground. I always sort of perceived them as this ragtag bunch that were just shooting heroin up and playing instruments when they had the time. As it turns out, they are very talented individuals. Lou Reed's writing on that song, it really is just moving. Um, it's marvelous. It's remarkable. Yeah, it's one of the best. And speaking of best, is there an album that needs to replace this one on the list?
No, I don't
No,
know. I think it
no.
fits. I think it fits. Yeah, there's a couple other. I think right. There's two more Velvet Underground albums on the
Yeah,
list.
there's White Light, White Heat, and the Velvet
Hmm.
Underground and Nico, and I'm trying to figure out which of those two gets the boot for Loaded when I inevitably get round to that. So prepare yourself for that one. Um, no, I think it's very difficult. I mean, to be fair, it's kind of like for me, Velvet Underground have always been defined by their album covers. The first one had Andy Warhol. The second one was a very, very minimalist perception. I think it was just a black sleeve. This one feels like an album cover. It feels like a band. It feels like Velvet Underground at their most sort of connected, despite the fact that John Cale had just left, despite everybody having an independent individual song. It feels very fragmented, but the unity on the front of that cover it's something else. It really is. Um,
They've come into
yeah,
their own. It's like, yeah,
come
we're
into their
fully
own.
formed
Exactly
now.
that.
This is why it's called The Velvet Underground.
And that's the thing. I think that's why it's around this time they did Loaded the next year, but by that point, Lou Reed was about to embark on his solo stuff. He did Transformer in '72.
Mm.
Those tractions of unique quality were starting to separate, and you can see it on here. It's a real essential. And speaking of essential, it's high time we plugged our socials because the only way to grow in the shark-infested water is to plug your socials to strangers on the internet who can then yell at you, such as one other comment I got on a review of Owl City's Kelly Time. Twat. Thanks for that.
Shout out to the twat.
Brilliant. To be fair, I did. If I can indulge myself with another comment, because I did actually approve this one because I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
They they just wrote, "Do you write purposely bad reviews of songs that are not fitting to your taste because your words just come off as bitter and it's sad?" Yes, I do. That's the whole point of an opinion. If there's nothing objectively that I find interesting, I don't bother. And if
I
you want
think
more of that,
purposefully.
if you
Just
want more of that, you can follow me on Twitter and at Ewan Gleadow. It's scrolling down the bottom. So forgive me if I don't read it out because about halfway through that Circle Waves rant, I felt my breath go, and I'm pretty sure I've cracked a rib.
Ouch.
Which, from a sitting down position, is more impressive than anything. But you can get me on all the things that are listed down there, cult following and the likes. And you can get me on some of the stuff that Nick's about to mention, I imagine.
Yes. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at NickyGran97, and there you can find links to everything that I do. All of my reviews on Letterboxd and clapperltd.co.uk, as well as my short films that I make and other projects that I've worked on. And also, you can listen to the Death Adaptation podcast, where Ewan is often a co host there, supporting me as we talk about books and their film adaptations. And also on the Uncut Gems podcast, where I'm coming and going recently because it's a busy schedule. It's very, and it's a very, there's a lot of episodes on that podcast every month, but it's always a pleasure. We're doing a year long Steven Soderbergh and John Cassavetes retrospective. So I feel like those two filmmakers, consider subscribing to the Patreon, listening to some of those episodes.
Lovely stuff. And I've still not figured out how to end these sort of podcasts. So if we just sort of sit in silence for a moment and I'll click stop recording.